Hello and welcome to Raw Living Radio. This is Clementine, Libre. I'm so excited to be with you celebrating life. And it's interesting to me how our modern society has construed that to mean unconscious consumerism and lots of self-destructive behavior like drinking, drugs, alcohol, and toxic foods. And that's baffled me ever since my children were young and I've started considering their future and what I'm contributing to as far as their future goes. So what better way to celebrate this season than to listen to Raw Living Radio and follow your heart down that path to health and truth. So thank you for joining us this week. And hello, Hava. Derby on the line.
Hello, lovely. Well, I'm with you. I'm getting inspired by these healthy and vibrant beings and kind of been going through an existential crisis, as it would be called, as far as doing my dharma and showing up the way I'm supposed to in the world. And Clementine offered me a session. She does vitalization energy work, guided sessions to free you from lack and scarcity, unworthiness, fear, and help you tap into your own power and enjoy true wealth. And you're so amazing at it, just so perfect. I just came out of it so empowered and physically in my body, and I love that that's a big piece of what you do is to get people in their emotional bodies and move through things gently. You also offer EFT tapping sessions and kitchen transformations and diet and weight loss sessions. I tune in with Clementine feeling called to this. $33 a session. People can check you out at eatliveandthrive.com. And that's my shout out to your Clementine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I love having guests on our show. I've gone down the wormhole of today's guest's YouTube channel and have spent hours watching him speak and share such profound wisdom. And I love when we have guests on that inspire me to get back to basics and simplify my diet, my life. And so I'm really honored we have on Loren Lockman today. And Loren is a highly sought-after speaker, a certified permaculture instructor, or Reiki master, sweet animal lover. I just watched him doing a video with a sweet little black cat while he did push-ups. He's the author of The Unconditionally Guaranteed, Creating Perfect Health System, a columnist, and success in healing himself with many ailments, including irritable bowel syndrome, candidiasis, chronic fatigue, and 57 allergies, mostly through water fasting. He now has the incredible day job of founder and director of Tanglewood Wellness Center down in Costa Rica, where he's helped more than 5,000 people from over 50 countries take their health and vitality to their highest levels possible. And we'll talk about water fasting. Welcome, Loren. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. A pleasure and privilege to be here with you.
Yes, I've been so excited to have you on. And there are so many things that I'd love to chat with you today, species-specific diet, and I love your sharing about emotional health, and of course your 8 keys to optimal health and why juicing and blending could be detrimental. There's so many subjects I'd love to chat with you about. We're going to start with dehydration and hydration and what you consider one of the most important health topics. So let's get started there.
Sure.
Yeah, hydration. We know it's critical to health to be hydrated. How does hydration play a critical role in our health, and why are so many people so dehydrated?
Yeah, most of us grew up hearing that we should be drinking 8 glasses per day or X number of ounces per every pound of weight, some formula like that. There's been this consciousness around being hydrated. I was shocked when 10 years ago we started measuring people's cellular hydration using bioimpedance analysis. And we're able to get an accurate reading on how much water is being held in the body. I then do some calculations to determine what percentage of their lean tissue is water. And I was surprised to find out that even the people who are coming to us, we've measured now 2,700 plus people over the years, and these aren't typical Americans who are eating a lot of junk food and so forth. These are typically health-conscious, intelligent, educated people who are making much better choices than most. And I was surprised to see that the average person's coming in around 15% lower in hydration than I've seen as possible.
Wow, very low.
It's a B, it's an 85, it's not that bad, but as it turns out, when we're talking about the body, it actually makes an enormous difference because most people would probably tell you that the human body is 70% water. That is more or less true when we're looking at the overall body, depending on the amount of body fat, because body fat contains virtually no water. Ironically, as the body metabolizes fat, for instance, when we're fasting and we're fully in ketosis and the body is living almost exclusively on body fat, it's manufacturing water as a byproduct of metabolizing that fat. And this is the way a polar bear can spend 5 or 6 months underground consuming nothing, no food or water, not only emerge perfectly fine in the spring, but birth 2 or 3 cubs and breastfeed them while still being perfectly fine herself without getting dehydrated. And although the same principle is absolutely possible for human beings, but most of us don't achieve it. Most people are severely dehydrated. You asked the operative question, why is that? Mm-hmm. When you think about what happens in nature, if we're talking about any kind of species, and we've got species that eat nothing but plants, many of them, and we've got species that eat animals. If we start with the plant eaters, whether an animal is eating the leaves off of trees like a giraffe, or is eating little green plants like a rabbit, or maybe is eating grass like a cow, or anything else, even a termite who's eating mostly wood is still getting mostly water, because every living plant is mostly water. 85 to 90% water. Wood, we dry it before we can use it because it's full of water. Now look at the carnivores. Look at the animals that eat animals. This is a little bit gory, but as you may know, when a wolf kills its prey, or any carnivore, usually what it does is it bites through the jugular vein, and then it drinks all the blood as the animal's bleeding out. Blood is about 92% water. Then it tears it open and eats the water-rich internal organs. Then it eats the muscle, and it leaves the bones and the hide and the teeth. It eats all the parts that are very rich in water and leaves the driest parts. When we talk about the meat, the carnivore does different than most people. It doesn't cook the water out of it. So it's getting something that's relatively high in water even with that, where people who are eating meat have taken much of the water out of their food, or so-called food, by cooking it. And the same is true with almost everything. So if you think about what happens in North America, what does the average person do in the morning when they wake up? First meal, coffee, cereal, toast. How much water is in that food? Almost none.
Yep.
The cereal is completely dry. If you put milk on it, the body does not see that as water. It's not usable by the body. The coffee not only contains, made with water, but is it water to the body? No, it's not water to the body, and it's a diuretic. So it's forcing the body to give up water. And the same thing is true with almost everything people eat. In fact, I have a graphic example that I love to use. I've used it many times. Ladies, you both eat corn chips, yes?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
Okay. How much water would you guess is in corn chips?
None.
Negative.
Yeah. I don't know that we can get to be less than 0. There's no water. So
right.
Corn chips come back out of your body. You process them, you chew them up, they go through your system, and they come back out of your body. Are they as dry as when they went in?
No.
You better hope not. It's going to be relatively uncomfortable if they are. Okay? They're going in completely dry. They're coming out wetter than that. And the question is, where's the water coming from?
Yeah, it's pulling it from our systems, isn't it?
Right, and that's an obvious example. The point that's really critical to understand, we are intended, like other species, to be eating food that's exceptionally rich in pure, perfect water. You can't do better. According to one expert, the water in our plant foods is 10 times more easily assimilated by the body than the water that we drink. Mm-hmm. And that's because of the cellular structure of the water in our food. It's because of the fact that it's always ionic. It's bonded to ions. There's minerals in solution, which the body needs because we are electrical beings. People think we run on sugar. Glucose is the fuel that fuels the body, but we're actually running on microelectric current, electricity, which is created by burning the glucose. So in order to transmit electricity through the system, we need to have water that contains ions. And when we're eating the optimal diet, we're getting tons of that. But when we're eating anything else, we're not. Not only are we not getting much water from our food, the average meal, but we're losing water. The average person struggles because if we put some numbers to this, it makes some sense of it. If we were eating the watermelon, papayas, mangoes, like that our bodies are designed for, then we'd be getting 16 ounces of water with each meal. 3 times a day, 48 ounces of water. Let's say, to keep the numbers simple, instead of doing that, we're getting virtually no water with our food. Now, that's you guys, but the average person is getting virtually no water with their food. And to keep it simple, say that they're losing 16 ounces to process that food through the system, as with the corn chips.
Right.
Now, instead of gaining 48 ounces for 3 meals, there's a net loss of 48 ounces of water for 3 meals. And if it's true that the water we drink is 10 times more difficult for the body to assimilate, we would drink 480 ounces to make up for that loss.
Wow.
I've made these numbers up. These aren't the numbers. Just to give you a sense of what's happening. This is how people get dehydrated. They get dehydrated because, I don't know how long you got making excellent choices. You know, I'm 53, and the day after Thanksgiving was my 23rd anniversary as a raw vegan.
Wow.
Yay.
Thank you. But that means for 30 years, I was eating conventionally. The first 20-some, very conventionally.
Right.
And I emerged from that period of my life severely dehydrated. Not the 15% I measure here, but closer to 20% that I've seen with a few people, because I don't see people like the person I was 30 years ago. So that's how people get dehydrated. Why don't they get hydrated by eating an optimal diet? Because we see at least 50%. We have 17 people here now from 13 or 14 countries, and many of them, probably half of them, came here already eating a raw vegan diet, or at least attempting to, eating a high proportion of raw food. Mm-hmm. And yet virtually every single one of them was severely dehydrated when they got here. That's almost always true. In fact, over 99.5% of the people we've measured have been severely dehydrated, 15% roughly.
How does that
how's that possible? Well, it's a great question, the answer, because I can't really know what's happening. But if you think about the fact, I've been guiding people through the fasting process now for nearly 19 years, and I've worked with a lot of people. And when you think about cleansing the body, there are 5 primary channels of elimination, 5 ways we get the garbage out of the system. The 2 obvious ones are the urinary tract, which many people don't realize this, but it's actually numero uno. Most of the garbage is dumped into the bloodstream and filtered out through the kidneys. So your urine contains most of the garbage that your body is attempting to get rid of. The colon's the other obvious channel. Through the colon, we're eliminating solid waste, including the fiber that we can't digest, etc. But most of the toxic stuff is actually broken down by the liver and then put back into the bloodstream to be eliminated through the kidneys. But whether we're talking about the colon, the urinary tract, or the other 3, which are the skin, the mucous membranes, or the breath, all 3 of these channels have one thing in common. They all require water, because water is the universal transport medium. So nothing is moved out of the body in any of these channels if there isn't sufficient water in the system. What's happening? Even when we've got a dehydrated body, we then go to an optimal diet or close to an optimal diet with lots of high water content foods, maybe even juices and smoothies. As you know, I don't consider that optimal, but a lot of people are doing that, and still what's happening is they're not getting hydrated. It's because the body places such a high importance on detoxifying, on cleansing itself, that it's constantly attempting to do that by putting much of the incoming water into those channels to try to cleanse itself. Unfortunately, it rarely succeeds without giving the body the concerted opportunity which constitutes a properly conducted water-only fast. And when people are living their normal lives, being active, and eating even the best diet, they're still using roughly 50% of their daily energy processing food, and much of the rest doing everything they're doing. So there isn't much energy to cleanse and heal. When we slow down and give the body the concerted opportunity, and there's no food being processed and nothing except pure water, now the body is conserving so much energy that it's able to put that energy into cleansing and healing, and we see that finally happen. And as a result of that, people come here, and we don't see significant changes in their hydration while they're here, because the body is continuing to put all the water they're taking in, sometimes a lot of it. I have a guy here now who's drinking upwards of 5 liters a day because he can't stay hydrated otherwise. And this water is going not to hydrate his body, but into the channels of elimination. Often we're rehydrating old, nasty stuff that's been sitting in the body, sometimes for decades. Oftentimes we're eliminating through all the various channels, but that water is going to those places first.
So does this water, since it's not coming from the foods and getting all the ions, and it's not in that specific molecular state, it still is sufficient to hydrate us and help us with this elimination process?
The answer is it rarely actually hydrates people. We keep people safe. We keep them basically where they came in. Sometimes there's a small improvement in hydration. Sometimes there's a small decrease in hydration if they're not drinking enough. Most of the water is going to be used to cleanse the body, and it's true. It's not optimal. If we're processing food, the body doesn't have the energy to do the cleansing and healing the same way. So what else is there? What happens is, by fasting long enough, the people get most of the garbage out of the body. and therefore set the stage for proper hydration afterward. So those people who have access to various ways to measure their cellular hydration later on are usually going to see 3 to 6 months down the road if they continue to make the optimal choices along the guidelines that I provide them with when they leave here. They get a written document. If they follow those guidelines, they will inevitably see massive changes in their hydration 3 to 6 months down the road.
Because the body's so intelligent that it will get to work and do what it needs to do this detoxification process, and then the water keeps us in the safe zone, keeps things moving, and hydrates us as best as it can.
Exactly.
At the same time, allows for there to be that pure state where the body can do what it knows how to do specifically.
Yeah, and it's important to point out, a reminder, is as the body breaks down body fat, which is the primary source of fuel, if someone's fasting properly, that's important. If they're not fasting properly, then the body is consuming a significant amount of muscle because muscle is a more efficient source of fuel than fat. And the body is always attempting to be as efficient as it can be. So if someone insists on being active, physically or mentally, they're actually going to consume less fat and more muscle. It's ironic, the people who fast to lose weight and are only looking at the number on the scale are thrilled because they lose more weight that way because muscle weighs more than fat.
Oh,
but nobody wants to lose their muscle. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know, if we look at nature, ladies, as you know, things I teach and practice based on my efforts to understand and apply the laws of nature to the human body because we can improve on nature. There are roughly 800,000 animal species out there, and virtually every one of them, when sick enough or badly enough injured, will lay down and stop eating. They don't do any unnecessary activity. In fact, Diablo, the black kitty, has fasted twice in the last year.
Wow.
He was injured once by a much bigger cat badly, and the second time wound up with a serious infection after a medical procedure. He got fixed and wound up not doing so well. And both times spontaneously fasted for 3.5 days. He basically wouldn't move. He would just lie in one spot. That's what animals do. I don't think we're going to improve on that.
The animals dry fast.
Animals typically do. This is another fairly contentious issue. Lots of varying opinions and misunderstandings. It's true that animals don't drink water when they're fasting. But I object to the term dry fast for the reasons every single channel of elimination depends on water. If you're living in your body, animals are in touch with their natural instincts. They live in their bodies. Most people I know live in their heads. Ask your friends how they feel, and 9 of them will probably say, well, I think I feel, which means they're thinking, not feeling. Animals, because they live in their bodies, they're walking around well hydrated, and they're eating what they're intended to eat. Most people aren't doing that. If you take an organism, whether it's a human or any other, and you're starting out already seriously dehydrated, fasting without bringing in water ensures that the body doesn't have enough water to cleanse or heal, and winds up in a traumatic state. You're putting the body into an emergency process. Now, people say, well, dry fasting is more powerful because you go into ketosis faster. It's true you do, but the reason for that is because when we're in ketosis, we're metabolizing fat, we're releasing water into the body. The body goes into ketosis to try to stay alive because it needs the water. If we're fully hydrated, this isn't an issue. I'm constantly arguing with people, explaining why I don't think dry fasting makes sense for most people. The fact is that when I fast, I drink precious little water because I'm the most fully hydrated person we've ever measured here.
Wow. And that is, I've watched your videos on optimal diet, and that is you're eating a very high fruit and tender, eating mostly fruits and high water content, soft, tender, green leafy vegetables.
That's right. That's pretty much all I'm eating most of the time.
Yeah, and so you would say to stay properly hydrated, don't drink more water, eat more water-dense foods.
That's right. Unfortunately, the fact is that for most people, and listen, don't get me wrong, changing your diet is absolutely critical. And if anyone listening is committed to the high level of health, then I would suggest that they watch my videos and change their diet accordingly because I don't think you can do any better. And I've proven it myself over many years and with many clients. Unfortunately, just changing the diet alone is not likely to allow for full hydration until the body gets clean. But it's a first step. The next step is to give the body the concerted opportunity to cleanse and heal. Here, the average person spends 5 or 6 weeks fasting for 26 to 30 days, sometimes as long as 42, and sometimes as short as 5, although we don't typically see massive shifts with a 5-day fast. Getting the body a chance to cleanse and then following with an optimal diet guarantees an exceptionally high level of hydration. People are often surprised. Someone who had been here with me for about 6 weeks one day saw me taking a sip of water and said, I just realized that's the first time I've seen you drink anything. And it's true, because in an average week, I might drink 2 or 3 glasses of water, and yet I stay fully hydrated.
It makes a lot of sense. Recently, a lot of your videos and observations are talking about that juicing, where you're overly processing these whole foods, isn't optimal. I have recently been trying this mini beet protocol because I have some severe lead poisoning, and I thought, oh, this sounds like a fairly natural way to help with this. And so what you do is you drink a cup worth of beet juice and you mix it with either asparagus juice or celery, something to balance it out some, and you immediately follow that with 3 apples and a couple of carrots to add in all that fiber and help pull it through. So I've been doing this 3 weeks, and I have not been to refill my water in this period of time, and I was refilling it all of the time, and I thought, what's wrong with me? Why am I not thirsty? And just that little added, I think from the apples and the carrots more than anything, that added hydration that I'm getting from upping the fruit intake, and carrots are pretty juicy. They've got a lot of water in them, so I think that that's made a big difference. I drink a little bit of water every day, but nowhere near as much as what I was having.
Yeah, you're probably right, because we could take a lot of time, but for anyone really interested in the negative impacts of dehydration and how common this is, one of the things I came across probably 20 years ago now was a book called Your Body's Many Cries for Water. Yeah. You've probably seen it. Yeah. It's fascinating because Dr. Batman, as he was called, he passed away a few years ago, but Dr. Batman claimed to have treated thousands of people with all kinds of conditions by simply getting them better hydrated and watching their symptoms melt away. Now, the interesting thing is he died at the age of 72. So he lived about 90% of the average life expectancy, and that's not unusual for MDs. MDs don't tend to do very well because they don't really know all that much about health most of the time, and I don't think he was an exception. What he was doing was having people drink copious amounts of water with a teaspoon of salt, because the salt forces the body to hold the water, and the osmotic pressure eventually is going to increase the water inside the cells because the water is being held outside. Because there's going to be a pressure imbalance, you're going to wind up hydrating that way, but at what cost to the body? Obviously, maybe it's not obvious. I would point out our bodies are looking for organic, that is plant-based minerals. We need the minerals from plants, and plants, with the help of bacteria, can convert inorganic rock and metallic forms of minerals into plant tissue. But we don't do so well with eating metals and rocks. So salt is mined, it's a rock, and it's not really very good for us. In fact, as you may be aware, if you're ever shipwrecked, which isn't that likely in Arizona, and the only thing there is to drink is seawater, you're actually better off drinking nothing. You'll dehydrate yourself faster if you drink salt water than if you don't drink anything, because the salt will take the water out of your cells. So he was doing this in a way, he designed this protocol that actually eventually wound up getting the body to force water into the cells. But it was a symptomatic treatment. He never looked at what people were eating. He never addressed their lifestyle choices. He just addressed a way of getting them hydrated without dealing with the underlying issue. And we know from our own experiences with medicine and seeing it around us, treating symptoms doesn't work. It may make people feel better, but it never actually addresses the underlying problem, and therefore never corrects the underlying problem. And so Dr. Batman passed away much earlier than he could have, and if he had simply changed his diet, he could have gotten probably more hydrated and would still be alive.
When you're these electromagnetic beings and the benefits of the conductivity, you get that naturally through the fruits and the dark leafy greens, et cetera, assuming that they're grown in nutrient-rich soil, though.
Exactly. Obviously, today's commercial produce contains a fraction of the nutrients that it would have many years ago. It's really not fit for human consumption. But honestly, one of the things that I've been telling people for over 20 years is that if you care about your health, you buy organic produce. And there are people listening who are thinking, that's outside of my budget. And this is probably going to push some buttons, but I would say to somebody, if you care about your health, you need to buy the highest quality food, period, and then re-examine your priorities. Figure out where you can save money or where you can make more money to cover the cost of the food. But you have to have the highest quality food, or you're simply never going to experience the health and vitality that's possible for you.
Right.
For eating organic all these years, it's one thing I don't even think about skipping on. It's just built into the rent. It's like it's non-negotiable.
Me either. People look at me like I'm from another planet because I won't go out to eat with anyone, and that's because there's nowhere nearby that is actually preparing meals organically, let alone if they're using salt, then there's just no way I'm going to eat it. So I'll only go out to eat when I'm in LA or somewhere where I can go where I know it's all organic.
Get an organic meal. Yeah, I understand completely. By the way, all salt was originally under the sea. That's where all salt came from. Sea salt was wetter more recently.
Right.
But I can understand where you're coming from. Personally, I will occasionally have a salad out somewhere, even if it's not organic. But the majority of the time, I know that what I'm consuming is the highest quality food possible.
Yeah.
You're clean. Yeah, you're clean enough that your body's like, whatever.
You can efficiently deal with it.
That's true. You're right. And for anybody who is trying to get from a less than optimal level of health to an excellent level of health, it does make sense to not make compromises, because the cleaner your system is and the better your choices are, the cleaner your diet is, the faster you're going to get to where you want to go. Once you've got there, it's absolutely true that it will be able to handle those little bumps in the road from time to time much better than someone who's trying to get themselves to that level of health.
Speaking of that, and one of the choices I know I make many times a week, almost every day, a couple of them that was very interesting to hear you speak on is juicing and blending my vegetables. And I have a funny story. My son today first asked for me to make him juice for the first time in I don't know how long. I said, well, I'm listening to Loren talk about how juicing it's fragmented, it's overly concentrated. I'm basically breaking it down. It's not the best thing for us. And he said, well, can he make me a juice?
Right.
I made he's 15, and I made him the juice. But talk more about juicing, because this is, for me and Clementine, juicing is a big part of her protocol right now. Talk about juicing more and why it's not the perfect food that we think it is.
I'd be glad to. It's important to start out by saying, because this pushes lots of people's buttons when I talk about this, and it's important to understand that everything is relative. So people frequently say, well, juicing, I did this long juice feast and it helped me, and I'm not denying that. That happens. But I think it's important to understand why. And the reason why is very simple. In every single moment of our lives, our magnificent, virtually infinitely intelligent bodies are doing everything they can to cleanse and heal, to take themselves to the highest level of health. As soon as we improve anything, our health is going to improve. If you take someone who's, I'm sure you both saw Super Size Me years ago with Morgan Spurlock. Let's say that you've got someone eating nothing but McDonald's, like Spurlock did for a month. And then you take away one of those Big Macs and fries and chocolate shakes, and in its place, you put in a big green salad. I would expect their health to go up. And I think we could agree that's not because McDonald's twice a day plus a green salad makes for a healthy diet.
Right.
It just makes for a better diet than he was doing before. So when you take somebody off of a standard diet, and for many people, even off of the standard raw vegan diet, which often includes lots of dehydrated food, might include lots of nuts and seeds, which are relatively difficult for our body to process and often overly fatty, overly high in protein. We do that, and we go to 1, 2, 3 weeks of only consuming juices. Our body is going to feel much better. It's going to have a much better chance to cleanse and heal. And we're going to see some improvements because of that. I'm not saying that drinking juice is the worst thing you can do. Obviously, there are far worse things that we could do. But it's also not the best thing we can do. And there are people who seem to believe that we can take beautiful organic produce and we can run it through a machine and somehow magically transform it into something even healthier, like juice is healthier than food. If you think about that for just a moment, I hope that doesn't make any sense to you.
Weren't Arnold, Ehret, and Walker, weren't those people, when they first started writing these books and talking about it, weren't they targeting specific healing crises and advocating juicing not as a way of life, but as a short-term way to help get people back on track to health? And it seems to me that that's how it first started coming about.
You may be right. And again, certainly for someone coming off of more of a typical standard diet, going to nothing but juice may be a huge improvement. And if it is, they're certainly going to see dramatic healing results from doing so. Mm-hmm. But I would simply point, when people talk to me and they say, listen, I would love to do a water fast, but I don't have the time because you need to be resting, or I can't afford to do that. And personally, along with almost anyone else who's ever had any real experience with fasting, I wouldn't recommend anyone do more than 5 to 7 days without experienced supervision. But whatever their reason, or they simply don't want to do it. And so they say, I'm going to drink juices instead. What I would normally say to them is, I understand water fasting might not be in your immediate future. However, my advice to you would be instead to eat nothing but high water content mono meals. So meals with watermelon, papaya, pineapples, citrus, even apples and pears, which aren't super high, are fine. Any juicy fruit, not bananas, not dates, not things that are relatively low in water content, because they're not going to help. They're going to be much more of a burden on the body. They have much more of a glycemic load. They're going to be much harder for the body to process, and they're going to allow for much less cleansing and healing. But eating whole foods is always better than drinking juices. And you've mentioned some of the reasons why. They're overly concentrated. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. Years ago, I finished a lecture somewhere outside of Washington, D.C., and a woman came up to me to ask me some questions. And I answered the questions, and then in the lull in the conversation, I said to her, you drink a lot of carrot juice, don't you? And she said, yeah, how'd you know? I said, you're orange. Her skin was orange. And she said to me, well, that's because I'm detoxifying. And I said, I run a fasting center. I've helped thousands of people detoxify in the single most powerful way you can do it, and no one's ever turned orange. I don't think detoxification turns you orange. You're consuming a toxic quantity of carotenes. Your liver can't process them. Your body's being forced to process these things out through your skin. That's too much. It's not helping you. And there's an example. Think about carrots. How many carrots could you eat at one time?
2 or 3 at the most.
You get much beyond that, especially if they're large, and your jaw is going to...
Yeah, if it's a large one, just one.
Yeah, right? But how many large carrots go into a big glass of carrot juice?
People do 6 or 8.
Exactly. We would never consume that many. So when I say it's overly concentrated, I mean it's more of that food than the human body would ever process at one time. And yeah, but that's great because we're getting lots of nutrients, because if something's good for us, more must be better. No, we work to process every single thing we take in.
Right.
It's work for the body.
And people aren't swishing their juice around, and they're just gulping it straight down, and there's all kinds of things that people aren't even aware of when it comes to... Right,
and oxidation. Oxidation is very real.
Yeah.
Now, there's a well-known raw educator, I won't mention any names, who once said that juicing means 85% of the nutrients are oxidized. I did find one study that said that 40% of the vitamin C in tomatoes that were being pressed with a hydraulic press, not a conventional juicer, not a juicer, it was a press to make tomato paste. If you think about a press, you fill it up with tomatoes. There's no air in there, virtually no air, and yet 40% of the vitamin C was lost in 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow.
Think about a juicer now. Run the same tomato through a juicer where air is being pulled into the machine, and you're now tearing the tomatoes into a million tiny pieces. Now, dramatically more of the surface area of that tomato is going to be exposed to oxygen. And you know what happens when you take an apple? You cut an apple in half. It immediately begins to turn brown. That's oxygen destroying nutrients. Imagine taking that same apple and running it through a juicer or a blender or a food processor, tearing it into a million tiny pieces. Now, almost all of the apple is exposed to the oxygen, and the majority of the nutrition is going to be lost very quickly. I don't know how to put a number on it. I don't know how to quantify it, but it's a significant amount. And so even if you juice it and then immediately drink it, you're going to lose a lot. And I know there are many people who go off to work, and before they go to work, they juice 2 or 3 liters of juices to take with them through the day. You're consuming something, if you're doing that, that has very little of its original nutrition or vitality intact.
And after 10 minutes, they think,
yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Again, I would say within a couple minutes.
Some people don't even buy organic because they feel like at least they feel like it's better than some other alternative. So really they're getting concentrated pesticides too.
Exactly.
Lauren, what I find so fascinating about this topic of juice and why it's maybe not the best thing for us is it comes down to it's an unnatural product. So when we talk about how you're really talking about let's just eat according to nature, it's an unnatural food.
That's right.
Don't go out
and I can't stress the importance of that. And I'll make a point that will probably surprise a lot of people. But there are several studies now that show that using vitamin supplements, even multivitamins, it might be more understandable if there was one concentrated nutrient. But even supposedly excellent multivitamins, using these supplements, people wind up with higher rates of disease. There are several studies that point this out. The first of them was the Finnish smokers study, where they took a group of middle-aged men who were all cigarette smokers, and they tracked them from the beginning of the study until their deaths. And one group got beta-carotene supplements, and the other group did not. And they expected that the people taking beta-carotene would do better. What they found out was that there were higher rates of lung cancer in the people who were taking supplements than the people who were not. And so what appears to be true is that when we create imbalances in the body by consuming these unnatural substances, we're setting up the likelihood, the conditions for higher rates of disease, because diseases are states of imbalance. So juices, if we come back to the idea of oxidation for a minute, unfortunately, not all nutrients oxidize at the same rate. If they did, it would be wasting a lot of money because we'd be oxidizing and we'd be losing a lot of the nutrients, but at least we'd be keeping the same balance. If we think about any natural food, we have a perfect synergistic mix of all the nutrients we need for everything to work as well as possible. But if we run it through a machine, now what we've done is we've oxidized some of the nutrients at a much greater rate than others. And so the apple juice does not contain the same mix of nutrients, the same concentration of various nutrients as the apple. We've created something very different. It's not just that it's all more concentrated, we've actually changed the proportion because some of the stuff has been destroyed at a much faster rate than others. So it's no longer even a reflection of the original food. And it's interesting, again, we talk about how terrible processed food is. But before I owned a juicer, I owned a food processor. When something comes out of that machine, isn't it processed? All of these machines are processing food. That seems silly to some people because it's very different than what we're getting in a package, and I understand that. But I'm pointing out, unprocessed food is the apple, the banana, the tomato sitting on the table. That's unprocessed. When we run it through a machine, it's no longer the same substance, and you just need to understand we're actually changing it.
Right, and then I love what you bring up a point one of your videos about wheatgrass juice and that people find it to be such a healing beverage. And what you say is if you can't eat the food, you don't need the food.
Some people can't even drink wheatgrass. Some people can't even stomach it.
Right, we can't eat the grass. So juicing it doesn't make it suddenly something that we need. And what I also love, you talk about juicing and blending foods, is that when you do that, eating a lot of those greens is a stimulant. And so people say, well, I've replaced my coffee with green juice. It's like, well, it's kind of acting the same way in the body.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And you know what,
folks, if you're listening to this show, many people have said to me, I don't feel as good if I don't have my green juice. I don't feel as energetic. It's good for me because I don't feel as good.
Yeah.
Think about this. When I'm here at my center in Costa Rica, I eat watermelon or papaya, sometimes watermelon and papaya, at least one or the other every day, virtually every single day. These are my staple foods. Very high water content, very easy to digest, and amazingly delicious. My body sings every time I eat them. When I travel to speak, I was in Eastern Europe last year for 6 weeks, and I spoke in Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia, and it was March. There was no watermelon or papaya, at least not anything I'd want to eat, and I was living on apples and other things. But I still felt great every single day. I didn't feel less wonderful because I didn't have watermelon one day. Anything we're consuming that if we don't consume it tomorrow, we don't feel as good, it's a stimulant.
Yeah, that's the other kind. That's the actual true definition for detox, is a withdrawal. And what we're talking about with Loren is actual detoxification. It's a different classification. But yeah, if you feel like you're having a watermelon detox, then I guess that's going to show you something that you need to look at if that wasn't happening.
That's right. It's important to understand why this is a problem. Why are these green juices stimulants? Why does that happen? The answer is very simple. Greens, we think about all the protein-containing foods. Most people would say, well, you got animal products, which we vegans don't eat. Other than that, we've got nuts and seeds, we've got maybe grains, but where else can you get protein? First of all, protein is the building block of living cell tissue. So every single living cell contains protein. I'm strong and fit, and I live on watermelon and papaya, and the occasional pineapple and mango, etc., and sometimes a salad, but mostly it's fruit. And all of my food contains protein, and we don't need much of it. That's a whole other conversation. But greens contain more protein per calorie than anything else we consume, more than meat. Greens are roughly 45 to 50% protein.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But that doesn't necessarily mean go and eat as many of them as you can.
No. In fact, what I wanted to point out is that excess protein is not good for us. As vegans or vegetarians, we've heard for years, I've been vegetarian at least for the last 27 years, and I don't know how many times people have said to me, where do you get your protein?
Right.
It's the question. And the real question we ask is, how do you ensure you don't get too much protein?
Right.
We need tiny amounts of protein. Excess protein is directly related to higher rates of disease. And research in the last year has shown very clearly that when we consume more protein than we need, it speeds up the aging process. You're probably familiar with nutritionfacts.org, and on those videos, Michael is talking about all the latest research. And in a video looking at vegetarian diets, vegan diets versus conventional diets, he said eating meat, he was talking about how the excess protein in animal products makes us age faster by shortening our telomeres.
Right.
He said the only way we could ever create the same effect is if we were eating 3 or 4 heads of lettuce at a time. Now, who would ever do that? People drinking green juices and green smoothies, like a serving of meat in terms of its negative impact on the body. So while you're going to feel good, and you're going to feel good because it's a stimulant, and it's a stimulant because your body is saying, I want to get this extra crap out of here as quickly as possible. And so everything speeds up to accomplish that. It stimulates your system. But ultimately, we want to feel good, not because we're consuming stimulants, whether it's coffee, cocaine, or too much lettuce. It's not helping us. We want to wake up and bounce out of bed because we feel good and our bodies are no longer toxic. They're fully hydrated. They have what they need. We don't do anything unnatural to create that. And the problem with greens, there are various, but one of the problems is if we're doing it, if we're consuming tons of them by juicing them or blending them, we're creating an age-increasing effect. We're aging ourselves faster by consuming excess protein.
Wow.
So the same would go for adding all the green powders and all those types of things to your diet as well then?
Absolutely, except that they're worse.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. My whole diet is in question.
Good news for you, because what you're going to find, a whole food diet, a lot less expensive. Listen, years ago, back in the late 80s, very early 90s, I got my first juicer. And I used to travel with 2 suitcases. I still do sometimes if I'm doing a long lecture tour. But in the old days, my carry-on bag, a couple pairs of pants and a few shirts and maybe a change of underwear, whatever. In the big bag, I had a big bag of apples and a big bag of carrots and my Champion juicer, which I carried with me everywhere. I didn't know where I was going. I'd be able to get the stuff organic, so I brought it with me. And I drank the juices. And it wasn't always apple and carrot, but that was sweet and easy to carry with me. And greens don't travel so well. But I was drinking tons of juices. And I finally figured out the hard way, it's not optimal. But the good news was I was saving a lot of money because that produce that we're running through the juicers and blenders costs a lot more than if we're simply eating the adequate amount of food. And, of course, the processed, the powders and so forth are even more expensive. We don't need those things.
Yeah.
I found I followed a quote-unquote fruitarian diet for about a year and a half, I guess. And I could never eat as much as was recommended. It was very hard for me. How do you feel about that when the suggestion is to consume these huge amounts of fruit? I didn't feel natural. I would eat mono meals 4 or 5 sapotes or something like that. I'd be fine, even like 3 or 4. I never wanted to like stuff myself like that.
Yeah, I say that advice is absurd. Stuff yourself. And that let's back up for a second. What's going on there? There are people saying if you don't eat enough, you're going to crash because you're not getting enough carbs. But it's important to understand we're not running on the food we ate today.
Right.
The food we ate today has to be converted to electrical energy. That's what we're running on. When we get tired at night because we're running out of electricity and we have to recharge our batteries, we talk about recharging our batteries, we're literally doing that. We're literally recharging. We're manufacturing microelectric current while we're sleeping and storing it as adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the battery of the body. We're not running on what we're eating today. Now, obviously, you might get a little bit of a burst of energy from the sugar coming into your body if you're eating fruit or anything that contains sugar, or if you're eating a stimulant, you're going to feel that. But for the most part, the food we eat today is going to be tomorrow's energy, and the body has to make it. It's not the food itself. So what we eat today, why would it have that impact? Why do some of these people, the people who are recommending you eat thousands of calories, feel bad if they don't get enough food? The answer is very simple. As soon as we are eating a truly appropriate number of calories, and we're eating only fruit, which is the easiest thing for the body to digest because it's what our bodies were intended for. It's what our closest primate relatives eat primarily. What happens when we're doing that, the body begins to detoxify. Whereas most people eating conventional diet, their body doesn't have any energy to detoxify during their waking hours. They wake up in the morning and they haven't eaten for 10 or 12 hours and they've got bad breath and they've got stinky armpits because their body's been detoxifying much faster at night while they weren't processing food. Mm-hmm. And they wake up, and it's interesting because if you guys remember this, if these commercials still ran when you were kids, when I was a kid, there were these commercials about how children needed to eat breakfast, how important this was. Research showed this.
Right.
Think about this. You take the average kid. One study published 10 years ago said the average American 14-year-old was eating fried chicken 3 times a week and pizza 5 times a week and soda 23 times a week, et cetera, et cetera. You take the average kid who's eating all this garbage and they sleep through the night, they don't eat breakfast. What's going to happen by mid-morning is their body's going to be heavily into detox, and they're not going to function very well. They're not going to think very clearly. What do? You put more garbage in their body, and they can think more clearly because they're not detoxifying. In the same way that you get a hangover after drinking, if you ever drank alcohol, you have a drink in the morning, and all of a sudden the detox stops because the body's got to process the alcohol you just took in.
Yeah, and when I was eating that way, it took a while, but it did wind up starting to become very ill, and I did stop that detoxification process. I had people point at me and say, you see that fruit diet that has made you sick, and just start eating normal again. And luckily I was smart enough to know that I was not becoming sick based on what I was eating at that time. I was becoming sick based on what I'd done 10, 15 years before that time.
Exactly. What you're saying is really critically important for people to understand, and so many people don't understand this. A couple weeks ago on Facebook, someone had asked, I've got this condition, what should I do? And someone said, I was called into the conversation, someone tagged me, they said, you should fast, talk to Loren Lockman about that. And so I went to look at what this was about. And one of the people who commented next said, don't ever do that. I tried it once, I would never do it again. And someone said, what happened? Why are you saying that? What happened to you when you fasted? She said, I got sick. You want to be really clear that symptoms are evidence the body is cleansing and healing. That's what they are. They're not the problem. They're part of the solution. And whether we're using medicine or we're using herbs or we're using many other things that people use today, processes, etc., what we're doing is we're suppressing symptoms.
Right.
These things don't heal us. Drugs don't heal us. Drugs originally came from plants. The herbs we take are toxic to the body, which is why the herbalist says only use this quantity or only this number of days in a row. How does something toxic make us better? It doesn't. It simply suppresses symptoms. The body, like every other organism, heals itself. So the best we can do is get out of its way. When we get out of its way, we expect symptoms to arise because that's what the body needs to do to cleanse itself. Cleansing means breaking down the fat where most of this garbage is stored, releasing it into the bloodstream to be filtered out of the system. But how do we feel when we've got garbage in the bloodstream? Not very good. We get sick. The body is creating symptoms because it's trying to cleanse itself. So it's important to understand that. You were absolutely right.
What if you dealt with alcoholism, drug abuse, and the sad diet for 35 years of your life on top of suppressing every illness you've ever had with antibiotics and medications and inoculations and everything else, and you're of a weaker constitution, so your organs have not held up well to that, and then you begin this extreme detoxification process and you can't get through stages 2 and stages 3 of the detoxification. How do you deal with something like that? The person, maybe they are a little weak for it, or their body, is that possible that you aren't strong enough to be able to detoxify?
supervised fast for 21 days.
I've earmarked this in my future, and I will be there someday to do a water fast with you. And I decided this a couple of years ago, and it's going to happen, and I've created the space for it to happen at the right time and place, so I will definitely be there. But that is the question.
I can promise you, and anyone else listening who makes a similarly excellent decision, it will be the single most powerful and beneficial thing you've ever done for yourself if you can follow some simple coaching. First of all, I need to point out a couple of things that are important. We can't control what happens. So what we're trying to do is monitor the process and keep you safe based on a lot of years of experience, because for years Tanglewood has been the largest fasting center, dedicated water-only fasting center in the world. I fasted a lot of people, more than all but a handful of people alive today. So I'm not a doctor, and it's important to understand that, but this is not a medical process. It's a natural process. And understanding what is and isn't okay and knowing when it's time to stop the fast, should that happen, we can almost always keep people safe. It's very rare that we wind up with any kind of an issue at all. It can happen because we're not controlling what your body's doing. But coming directly to your question, the body is intelligent enough to know exactly what it can handle. It's very rare to get into trouble because we're detoxifying too quickly. In fact, the more likely issues are the only real issue I've ever seen when someone winds up becoming low in electrolytes. And most people imagine that's really common. It's going to happen all the time. It doesn't. It's very rare. But it can happen if somebody is vomiting or if they have diarrhea for a long time. It might take 2 or 3 weeks for most people to get to this point. And we've had people go 2 or 3 weeks and still be fine. So it doesn't happen to everyone. But it is possible. So with 2 or 3 weeks of elimination that way, you're going to be eliminating electrolytes. And because we're only taking in, here we don't use distilled water. We use spring water. And most people think distilled is best because it's purest, and it is purest, but it's also unnatural. And one of the problems with it is distillation removes all the electrolytes. And as I explained earlier, without having those minerals in solution in the water, the body can't really use the water very well. And when we take it in, it takes electrolytes from the system. So we wind up becoming electrolyte deficient much more rapidly consuming distilled water than if we're consuming anything else. Now, this won't happen for most people drinking distilled water because they're also eating food. But if you're fasting and that's all you're consuming, you're actually losing electrolytes much faster with distilled water than you are with anything else. My preference, and what we use here, is spring water right from our own site. It's clean, and it always contains some inorganic minerals. This is metallic or rock minerals. We can't use them as nutrition, but their presence makes the water ionic so the body can use it. In the absence of access to pure spring water, my next best choice would be reverse osmosis. It's an excellent way of purifying water. However, it's not as good as distillation, and that's a saving grace because it only removes about 90% of the minerals. The fact that there's still a tiny amount of minerals left means the water's ionic.
Excellent. Well, Clementine, I think I speak for you when I say, here we are a bit after 4. Loren, I hope you'll come back and join us again because, boy, I know there's quite a long list here on my notebook of things I'd love to continue chatting with you about, your 8 keys to optimum health and emotional health and how big of a role that plays in our lives and, boy, all kinds of stuff. So I hope you'll join us again.
Anytime.
It's been amazing. It's been really, I say again, going down the wormhole of your YouTube channel. Once again, I'm reminded of just how amazing it can be to go back to basics and start eating a more simple diet, a more mono diet. And so I want to thank you for that inspiration today. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
It's been my pleasure.
Yes. Look forward because we will be arranging behind the scenes with Loren to have him back on, maybe 3 or 4 part if he's got time. Everybody listening is getting so much from this, information-wise, education-wise, and inspiration-wise. And if we can do it, we'll certainly bring it to you. And thank you so much.
Let's also let people know where they can touch in with Loren and his work. TangledwoodWellnessCenter.com is the main hub for finding out about supervised water fasting. There's also a link to his wonderful program, the Creating Perfect Health System, that's chock full of wonderful stuff. You've got quite a wonderful hub here of information information. So Tanglewood Wellness Center, you also have quite a presence on Facebook. You can find you at Loren Lockman, or you've got some wonderful groups as well. So yeah, do a little search for Loren on Facebook. Loren, I've watched a lot of your videos. You are so engaged with those people that are watching and connecting with you. You're really great about connecting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'd love to add one thing. For those people listening who may not be ready to fast but might be interested in having some help, I also do consultations and ongoing coaching via Skype.
Nice. Yay.
Great. Yeah. Clementine putting up links in the Facebook event page, Raw Living Radio. Please head over there and like us and follow all the great upcoming shows we have.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. And I'll put up some links to the YouTube videos as well. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies.
Thank you,
yeah,
Loren.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hava. Thank you, listeners. Be well. We will be back again. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.